My son-in-law and I are building this 12 by 16 shed that features a roll-up door and 2 interior storage lofts. So far we built the foundation, prefabricated all the parts, and then got help to assemble the shed like an old-fashioned barn raising.
Hold on. Oh, there it is.
And in this episode, we'll continue with details like windows, soffits, and trim to prep the shed for painting and roofing. Once upon a time, a boy met a girl working for a mouse. They fell in love and realized they'd never own their own home working for the mouse. So they packed up a big truck and moved to New Jersey, lived in a basement to save money for a year, and bought a foreclosure to fix up while they lived there. This is their story. This project is proudly sponsored by Nail Gun Depot and Everwin Pneumatic Tools. We built the walls with solid bottom plates to keep them straight during assembly. Even though we cut the door openings ahead of time, the bottom plates stayed in place.
Alright, we got a door.
Then after everything was nailed together, we went back with a reciprocating saw to remove the bottom plate from the doorways. You may think you could save a little money by using shorter lumber on each side of the doorway, but this is the best way to do it. We should have cut the full width of the roll-up door while the wall was on the ground, and it would have been much easier. Instead, I had to mark and cut the opening vertically and get showered with sawdust in the process. After the doorway was the right size, I could remove the bottom plate there as well. My design has the tops of the windows aligned with the tops of the doors and the interior lofts. Of course, I'm going at an angle, so that sucks. I marked the locations of the windows on the inside of the shed and then drilled holes through the sheathing so I could see them outside. I marked lines between the holes and cut them with my circular saw to the depth of the sheathing. But the round blade on the circular saw doesn't cut all the way into the corners, so I had to use the reciprocating saw to finish the job.
Honey, I'm home. There we go. Home. There you go. All right, let go. Let's see if it stays. It stays! Voila! You're in front of the camera. That way. Thumbnail. Yeah, right?
Now let's talk about the soffits. I designed the roof to overhang the front and back of the shed by about 8 inches. Although this is mainly for aesthetics, it also keeps water away from the building if you don't want to bother with gutters. Back in part 2, we cut the rafters to extend beyond the bird's mouth into a rafter tail. And that gave me a place to nail the fascia boards and attach the soffits. The challenge was we had nothing to attach the back of the soffit near the building. So because we have a table saw, we ripped some of our scrap 2x4s at 14 degrees to make spacer blocks for each rafter. We cut scraps of T111 siding to use for our soffits. The only lesson learned is that the seams need to match the sheets on the walls. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time matching the lines from the soffits to the walls.
They are not lining up.
I'm struggling in this clip because the wall started with a half sheet, so the wall seam is here. I started with a full piece on the soffits, so the seams don't line up. Anyway, I wound up having to rip it all down and start over, but in the end you'd never know. Also, as I was editing this video, I realized it would have been a lot easier to nail blocks to the rafters instead of doing all those beveled cuts on the table saw. So if you build a shed like this, don't make my same mistakes. Next came the trim, which was all done using 1x4 pine boards. The fascia boards went up first, and they were nailed to the rafter tails. Now I'll eventually be attaching gutters here, so I nailed them with the framing nailer for strength, and because the nails would be hidden.
Does it need to come to you at all?
The rake boards on the gables were mitered at 14 degrees to match the roof pitch. We used a finish nailer here so the nails would be less visible. The corners are covered with 2 boards, with one of them mitered at 14 degrees to fit against the rake. I initially nailed the boards together at the top and the bottom, and I marked the length.
Okay.
Then I finished nailing them the whole way down, and cut them both at the same time with the miter saw. Then I bring that whole assembly back and attach it with finish nails.
All right, we're going to fast forward a little bit, so just ignore the fact that the shed is already painted. But when I put this trim on and the top trim, it creates this bare spot here next to the soffit. And in some of the sides, it's actually big enough for, wasps and other critters to get in there. So we want to prevent that. And so what I did is I cut little wedges that are just going to fit right there like that. They'll get painted the trim color, and you'll never notice.
Now T111 siding is really rough, so I wanted to prime the shed with a spray gun. But let me tell you, spraying makes a mess. So that's why we primed it before installing the roof shingles. And that's a good segue because that's exactly what we'll be showing in our next episode. Stay tuned.
Welcome home.
Be sure to subscribe and watch our new series, The Living Flip.
Ooh. Look.
And that has 1.25 inches.
It's the little one. That's the